There are bad losses. There are really bad losses. And there are unforgivable losses. And that is exactly what happened on Saturday as Boston College not only loses to UConn, but manages to score 3 points against the Huskies. We're going to get into what this means, where I'm at with this program, and your thoughts on today's Locked On Boston College.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is AJ Black, Locked On BC. Thank you for listening. And if you're listening, I want to thank you for sticking with Locked On BC, your first listen every day. All right, folks, we're going to get into this. We're going to get into this hard. Mitch is not with us today. He's actually, you can get this, going back to watch and rewatch the game for our site Eagle Insider. God bless him. Because what we saw on Saturday was one of the worst losses in program history. It's not even close. BC falls to UConn 13-3. They fumbled the ball, 5 times? They threw 4 interceptions, I believe. I mean, it felt like 20 interceptions. It just kept coming and coming and coming. I have nothing bad other than that first drive really to say about the defense. I thought they played fine, but it's not about that. It's not this podcast today is not about recapping that game or going over the X's and O's of what happened, because we are way past that now. The UConn Huskies have never beaten Boston College before Saturday. UConn, last time they played BC with Steve Adazio, lost 39-16. And we fired that head coach a year and a half later. Jeff Hafley, in his offense, went out there and put up 3 freaking points against UConn. It was one of the most painful games I have ever seen. And I don't blame any of you if this was the last BC football game you watched for the 2022 season. Because I'm here covering it, watching it to talk about it on the podcast or to give you my thoughts and analysis on Eagle Insider. I'm watching this and I am bored to tears because it's just bad. B, ashamed because, I know being a BC graduate myself and knowing tons of you guys out there, I know many of you personally. I know what this game meant and how devastating it is. But more than anger, shame, or anger and just shame and boredom was I kind of just felt nothing. Like I just felt like the season has just blurred into nothingness. It's become this, season that you just want to forget about, that a year that we're now just 2 years away from that big magical season of 2020 where everyone thought that Jeff Hafley was going to be the answer for this team, and he clearly is not. And now we are stuck with a team that is as bad as 2015, 2012, and it doesn't feel like, 2012, we moved on from Spaziani right away after that season. 2015, many folks were like, especially after that Wake Forest game, were like, okay, we are done with Steve Adazio, and rightfully so. And it took 4 years more of that before they got rid of him. Now we are at a crossroads with Jeff Hafley. And the reason that we're there, and let's get into a little bit of like schematic stuff and the reason for the frustration. Look at the offense. How frustrating is it that you have Zay Flowers on your team and he can't do anything? He can't get him the ball. You can't get him open. I mean, he was completely irrelevant in this game. And by the end, he had a tough game himself, and that drop is on him, not on Emmett Morehead. But how much more can he take, right? But you have guys like Zay, you have Joseph Griffin out there, and you can't figure out a scheme to get them the ball. And you have two quarterbacks. And I'm going to go back to 2015 because this feels like 2015 to me. You have Phil Jurkovec, who you've game plan the game plan for him was awful. I don't know what they're thinking of doing with Jurkovec, but the fact that BC went into this game with the worst offensive line in the country, probably. I don't watch some of the bad teams that are on that list, but they're easily the worst in Power 5 football. And the game plan that you went into that game with was, we're going to play bully ball and try to push them around and run the ball. Is that really how you wanted to set the tone? UConn hasn't been a huge pushover. I talked about that last week. And now my prediction for this game wasn't even close, but I had a whole episode of why you should really be careful about UConn. And their defense was part of that. But you went in with an offensive game plan of quarterback runs and then some power football with that offensive line. That's what they came up with. Mind-boggling. And then they go to Emmett Morehead, who I know fans have been clamoring for, and I get parts of it. I mean, I saw glimpses of what you're looking at, but he's clearly raw too. And I'll get into later this week on what I think they should do with Emmett Morehead. And I'm firmly now in Team Morehead. But with Morehead, you throw him out there and all of a sudden you're doing these quick routes, which you've never seen under Jurkovec. And I know he's slow to get rid of the ball, but why can't they do that with Jurkovec? Like, there's no reason Jurkovec, who is supposedly this great quarterback, can't get the ball out of his hands quick enough. Like, it shouldn't take him that long to do a quick slant, for him to do a quick out. Why is there it seems like two completely different game plans here. And then on top of that, Morehead is, I mean, folks, as much as you like or hoping for him, there were points where he was very inaccurate. Like the interception he threw, I have no idea who he was throwing to. And then even the passes he completes, the guys on the call were calling it, he was inaccurate on those because the wide receivers had to slide to catch it. Any good pass would have gone for 30, 40 yards. But that being said, it all doesn't matter. None of this, all this talk about scheme, it doesn't matter. We're in a crossroads right now where we have a coaching staff that scored 3 points on UConn. I can't get past that. I can't get past the BC scored 3 points against UConn, a team that was allowing 30 points a game, and BC scored 3 points. So, in a moment, I'm going to get into what again, more of my frustrations with this program, and I'm going to look at special teams, because I don't know what the heck is going on there either, because that's a complete disaster. And I'm going to get into Zay Flowers, and I'm going to look at the story of a broken man. We'll get into that in just a moment. But BetOnline, they are your place to go if you are looking to make your next bet. BetOnline is your number one source for betting football and the start of the new basketball season. Find all your latest player developments, team matchups, news podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. They are great. I was looking today and I made an early morning bet, and I thought Travis Etienne would score a touchdown. I didn't make it, but you know what? There's a lot of other great bets out there. If you thought UConn was going to win, and I did not bet against that, but if you did, you'd make some easy money. And there's some interesting lines for next week. I saw Clemson at only 3.5 against Notre Dame. That seems like easy money, but we'll have to check that out. So head on over to BetOnline, where the game starts. This is Locked On BC, AJ Black, and we are talking about this unforgivable loss. And that's the only way I could approach it. I was talking to my wife about this game, and she's like, you could call it an atrocious loss. And I'm like, it's more than that, though. There's been bad losses in BC history. You can look at 2012 against Army, 2015, that 3-0, whatever that was, against Wake Forest, 2019 against Kansas. There have been bad ones. But this one was so much more soul-crushing because 2012, you knew what you had with Spaz. You knew that the bottom was going to drop off at one point, and it just and that happened, right? Because he you looked at the win totals with Spaziani from 2009 on, and it was like a steady decline. So you knew some really, really bad loss was going to happen. That wasn't a big surprise. 2015 with Wake Forest was bad, but I think it was still early in that 2015 season, so you weren't in the space yet that this was going to be like the atrocious season that it ended up turning into. So that was bad too. Kansas, yeah, that was bad. But it's Kansas. Kansas is, they've had some history, so it wasn't like totally terrible. It was terrible, but it wasn't as catastrophically terrible. UConn, it's a G5 program. And again, you go back to what people had expected, myself included. And again, I own what I've said. And I am not the type of host that hides. I know people like accuse me on Twitter of like denying what I said. If you guys listen to my podcast, I own every L I take. You know what I mean? I own my losses. It's not that. I think a lot of folks, national folks, people I've talked to, I'm talking people down south, Eric McLean, people from Sirius XM ACC, Locked On ACC, Bud Elliott from 247, all these guys I've talked to all thought Jeff Hafley was going to be a big time hire for BC. And so when I thought he was going to be this next big thing for BC, to see what I saw yesterday was just sad. And it just feels like Boston College football is right back where it started with Adazio, and it's just a new set of issues, right? Adazio was a jerk, and he was not likable. His brand of football was awful to watch, and he set back beat offenses for 20 years. But where's BC's offense now? It's awful to watch. It set offenses back 20 years. And at least I think we're just at Hafley's nice, right? That's all it is. With Hafley, the defense, it's fine. I'd love to see them be more explosive, but we haven't seen that yet. And then I go back to the special teams. Special teams is such an underrated component to football. But when I see Danny Longman for the third time in the last 3 weeks, kick a punt off the side of his foot for 15 yards. I see Zay Flowers. I think he dropped two punts. I see Connor Litton shank a kick, not even close. I go, what is going on? Because the offense is completely a disaster. The special teams is as big of a mess right now. At least they were kicking the ball through the end zone the 1-2 times they had to do it. That wasn't a big issue, but everything else was a problem. And so I look at that as a big issue, and it just kind of exemplifies to me. It exemplifies to me that when I watch this team, it's not just the offensive line. The offensive line is a easy go-to complaint for everyone. And honestly, there's validity to it, and I get that. And believe me, I've been using it too, right? There's some validity to blaming the offensive line. But at the end of the day, you have to find an answer. You don't need to find an answer if you're missing 4 offensive linemen to beat Clemson. You don't need to find an answer to beat Wake Forest. But you better have the guys and the game plan to go out there and beat UConn. Because that is on the coaching staff. That is their responsibility to say, okay, yeah, we're missing Finn Durstein and Kevin Klein and Christian Mahogany and whatever. I can't even think of who the fourth guy is. I know they're down 4. And Drew Kendall's playing with a club on his hand. But this is what we can do to still exploit a team that should not be as talented as we are. And we didn't see any of that. BC looks so deflated out there. For weeks, I've heard people saying they look like they've quit. They've looked like they've quit. I didn't agree with it at first, but the moments that hit me, they all were around Zay Flowers. He's been the face for any BC fan that has been like, oh, I hate watching this team, but they still got Zay. Watch his face in this game, man. It was so sad to watch. It was just like watching the air deflate out of a tire with this kid. He had the drop punts, he had that drop touchdown pass that Moorhead threw, and he just looked so beaten. Zay Flowers, I've known from going to press conferences in years past, is a guy with a ton of energy. He's got a $1 million smile. And to see him like that on the sidelines with his head in his hands, just looking absolutely sad, absolutely, depressed, it killed me watching that. But that's kind of where this team is. We've seen Jurkovec, not throwing a fit, but getting pissed off on the sidelines about stuff. We've seen some of the defensive guys getting upset. But through it all, Zay Flowers has been kind of that rock. And it took until like 3.5 quarters of this game for you to see that last gleam of this season drift away. And I don't doubt that Zay will probably still come back and make some incredible catches. But for him to look that way, for this season, for everything that we were hoping for, at least you knew that Zay Flowers came back because he's a BC guy, right? We've talked about that. He turned down the 6-figure deals to go stay at Boston College, and this is what he turned into. Not a good commercial for BC, I'm telling you that right now. But that's kind of where the program is at. It's taken the life out of everyone. You don't see any. You see some life on the defense, but from the most part, they look so flat against a team like UConn. Okay, that this wasn't good. And in our final segment, I'll give you my thoughts on Jeff Hafley. I'll give you my final thoughts, and folks, strap in. It isn't going to be good. But if you have not done so already, and you're listening right now, and you want to help support this podcast, because God forbid, I need more help. I need you guys to subscribe to my podcast. So all you need to do is on our page, hit that subscribe button right by the Locked On BC symbol. It helps support our show, and hit the like button as well. It helps with that algorithm thing. And I always think it's funny because I'm just this one guy that does a podcast with, a couple co-hosts here and there. But if it tells you how far BC athletics is so irrelevant that I am like the second search if you put up BC athletics. Like right below BC is me. And I would love to continue to go up that. And I think I will if you guys do that for me. Okay. All right. So in a moment, we're going to talk about Jeff Hafley. All right. AJ Black, Locked On BC. If you enjoy this podcast, check out Locked On ACC. I'll be giving some more of my thoughts on this current situation at BC on that show on Wednesday. I'm on with Candace Cooper. You can find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And again, Mitch will be on our show tomorrow. He is currently locked in a hole, probably drinking himself into oblivion, trying to rewatch the UConn game. So you're going to want to make sure you check that out. All right. So my thoughts on Jeff Hafley. So here's the deal. I am not the type right now to do the thing that like some blogs do, which is like just type fire Jeff Hafley with dumpster fire images and all that stuff. And that there's nothing wrong with that. That's their thing. And I am not on some of the other folks' side where they're just like, I'm going to support Jeff Hafley till the end of the earth. I am not that. On last week's episode, or 2 weeks, I forget when I said it. I don't mark down when I say things, but I know when I say certain things, right? I did say, if BC went 3-9, 4-8, I was still on the keep Jeff Hafley bandwagon. But if you go back and listen, I said that I was getting off the train firmly if Jeff Hafley loses to UConn. And I mean, I was like, even if BC lost, I was half expecting that if they lose, they were going to at least be competitive. They weren't even that. So I am firmly off the Jeff Hafley train right now, because my biggest issue with him, I said this before, he's a nice guy. I don't hold any ill will to him. And, I had a much more contentious relationship with Dazio than him. But that's not what this is, right? Nice guys are nice, but it's all about wins, right? It's all about the W's, and he's not winning right now. And the reason he's not winning is because the team is sloppy from top to bottom. And you can blame injuries. You can blame transfer portal issues. You can blame whatever you want. It's wins. And the issues on the field trickle from just like all the attention to detail stuff. I saw someone tweet about that. And if you're listening, I apologize. I don't remember who it was. But in 2020, BC was doing all the little things right. In 2022, they don't do anything right. They don't do any of the little things right. They're making mistakes all over the place with penalties, the offensive line's a mess, that, they're not making any turnovers. They're not getting really any pressure on the quarterback. Well, they did it against UConn, so I don't want to say that. The special teams are a mess. They're dropping passes. They can't run the ball. They're all the little things that you expect. And then they make like boneheaded mistakes constantly that cost them, right? So that to me strikes me as organizational failure. And at the end of the day, who is that on? That's on the head coach. So when that happens, organizational failure to the level that we see against UConn, a team that went 1-11 last year, you're darn right. I'm very concerned, and I'm done. I think I think BC does need a change in leadership right now. I do. I think that's where it's at. And it's better to get it done sooner rather than later, because, you can fix recruiting for the next cycle. You can get into, the transfer portal and get some name, and then try to get some of the guys that are on campus not to leave. But at the end of the day, what do I really think BC would do that? I mean, you folks know the school. They're not. I don't think they're going to do that. I think BC is the type of school that they're going to see what happened with the offensive line and say, oh, he lost his offensive line. We'll give him another year. But I'm going to tell you right now, I'm much more critical and much more pessimistic about what he can do. It's especially on the offensive side of the ball. And that's the biggest challenge for him coming into this career was that he had only defensive experience. And you go back and look at what his experience was, and I could see why some folks were skeptical. I saw his Ohio State stuff. I thought it was a good deal, and I heard a lot of national guys really like it, and I thought that was a great idea too. But he's said over and over again, right, that he needs to get more involved in the offense, that he needs to get a better grip on the offensive side of the ball. And I don't think I've seen any of that. They've got that archaic pro style offense that just isn't working. And honestly, if it was working, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It's the fact that they can't adjust any of it to make it work that is more concerning to me. But the systematic failure to do any of that stuff is a big, big issue. And to the point where I don't think it can be fixable with him. I don't know do you fire John McNulty and the whole offensive staff again? He did that last year. He basically replaced he replaced, other than Steve Shimko, the entire offensive staff. Are you going to do that again? I mean, you could, but I think at this point it goes up to him. And folks, I don't have any answers for this. I think he's on the hot seat hard now. I am supportive of moving on from him, and we'll get Mitch's take because I know he wrote for Eagle Insider the same thing today, but he's not working. And in college football right now, I know BC is like miles behind in a lot of different things. They need to be proactive about this stuff. They cannot let, I always forget, was Adazio here for 7 years? And he should have been gone after 3. Schools, good schools that care about winning move quickly. And I know Dino Babers has had his ups and downs, but Dino Babers can coach a team. Even those years that they were bad, they were competitive. What was it, 2020? They didn't even have a quarterback and they hung in with BC. That's a good coach. When BC is bad, they're real bad. And so I'm concerned about it. And we'll talk more about Jeff Hafley in this future on tomorrow's show. But I want to get to some of these comments before we head out. Dennis says, what can you say that has not been said in the last 24 hours? This program is in a free-for-all and is legit the worst Pro Football 5 program in the country. Hafley may be a good guy, but he is so in over his head. And he also says, we're in running neck and neck with Colorado for badness. Well, the big difference between the two of us is Colorado got rid of their coach. Me Too says, well, I think many things have happened. Their offensive line is inexperienced and young. Their quarterback has not played to expectations, which may or not be a result of the offensive line. The quarter's decision-making has been questionable at best, and they have players in place, but they are young. It is obvious that depth is a problem at all positions. I guess, but then I go back to, how do you fix that? You have to be active in the portal. And again, I don't know if there's backstage stuff behind that, and we'll never know that, but that's some good points as well. Frank Kelly says, do we even have someone coaching specials? They've been and I can't say the word because we're censored, since Rutgers. Yeah, we do. It's the same guy from the last couple of years, so that makes it even more confusing. And then I've got a bunch of spam tweets. Chris, would you put both Jeff Hafley and Bob Diaco in the same category as far as head coaching talent? Yeah. I mean, they're both very, Diaco, that's a good one. I think he was the guy that was a defensive coordinator, and I'm blanking on where, before BC, and he was like the defensive coordinator hire for a head coach in 2012 when they hired Dazio. And I remember certain folks really, really wanting him, and he flamed out hard at UConn. And then he hasn't done anything. I mean, he's been like a defensive coordinator, but he's been flaming out everywhere. So that in that sense, that being said, I do think that if BC does eventually move on from Hafley, I do think if he he'd probably go back a step, right? Most coaches like this would, where you go back to being a defensive coordinator. I think he'd be an excellent defensive coordinator. I think he'd be a good one at a big program too, right? He can recruit, first of all, and two, he's good at. I mean, we've kind of lost it in all the big picture of everything, but like, given some good talent, he could be a really good defensive coordinator. So I think that piece is a little bit different. And then Jeff. Is it unheard of to fire an offensive coordinator mid-season? Line coach, special teams coach? I could go on. It's not. And I know it was because of a specific situation, and I'm totally blanking on the guy's name, but I know Spaziani fired his offensive coordinator after the UCF game in 2011. And there was rumors of why that happened, and I'm not going to get into it. Hashtag respect my privacy. But he fired his head coach, I think 3 games into that season. So it's happened before. It can happen. And then finally, Chris says, can we just hire Deion Sanders already? So if you follow Locked On BC on Twitter, you saw me tweet that the other day. Please know I was only joking. Deion Sanders is not coming to Boston College. I know you folks would love to see him come to BC, but he's not the right fit, first of all. And C, he would never, I mean, it would be stupid for him to leave his current job to come to BC. I was just joking about that. And, I'm telling you, if some move happens where BC moves on, I'm sure I will give you running lists of who could come on to take that role. So thank you all for listening. Again, we'll be back tomorrow with Mitch. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button right now to make sure you're going to get all of our videos sent directly to you. We'll get tons of BC content, and I'm going to work through a lot of this stuff with you over this week. We got Duke on Friday, so yay, more football. This is AJ Black. You follow me on Twitter at AJ Black _BC. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.